Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Keturah Mazo. I am a 30-year teaching veteran. I started out being an English middle school teacher for 7 years, and then after the birth of our first child, my daughter, I went into teaching communication at the college level. And I was always So as I told people, I did this at Mystic Self. I've been trying to monetize what I wanted to be as a child, which was a fairy witch ballerina. And I'm beginning to work on that now after my kids are grown and I got through that 30 years of continuous teaching. But after 2020, I lost first my mother, my in-laws passed away, my father in 2022. And I had really kind of turned off my ability to talk to the energies around me. They scared me a little bit when I was a child, except for the fairies. Okay, so I always have my Fae wand with me when I go anywhere. Okay, and so I started to get certifications. I started with Reiki. I started then into angelic healing, and I went into art therapy and narrative exposure therapy, autism movement therapy. So all these different things I started combining. I did business coaching for international business coaching. And I really started noticing that my students after 2020 were losing the ability to hold a conversation, right? Everything was becoming like the keyboard warriors. It was one-sided. So this developed from me teaching how to have a professional conversation in class into more of how can I combine mirror work and narrative exposure therapy and Reiki. How can I combine all these things to allow people to have conversations, not only with each other, but with themselves? So that's really the background of where this comes from. It did come to me as a download. I will tell you that what I thought was an angel downloading, the energy worker who worked with me assured me that it was Goddess Nike. And I did recently find out that all angelics were actually patterned after Goddess Nike. So I think that was kind of where it went to from there. So when you go in to have a healing conversation, and kind of a goal that we have for tonight, this is the first thing I ask you to ask yourself, if it's going to let me move to the next slide. So we have two goals for this evening. One is me showing you how to create either a graphic or a timeline of positive versus negative events in your life. Okay, and looking at what wisdom did you gain from these experiences. And I'll go into an example from my life because I do practice this for myself as well. The second thing is, because we are opening up the room just like you set sacred space, I do tell you, even if you're, in fact, especially if you're working with your higher self in the mirror, you also want to create that safe space. Or you can also choose to do this with a trusted friend. You just do have to realize that everything is done through the hands. That's where I carry most of my energy. Many of you probably do as well. That is leading to your heart chakra. The heart chakra then fills any chakra which may have missing some parts. Okay. And what I do, I call doing this is humanizing. Okay. So many of us have experiences that were very dehumanizing, and this is a way for us to get grounded back into our body. I also tell you that I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. When you do energy work, I tell you to build it up. I always recommend 11 minutes of meditation prior as a minimum, up to 33 minutes. When you're having these conversations, doing this type work, build up, set a timer. Otherwise, you can drain yourself and get depleted. Okay. And the main idea is to have these sessions and fall a little bit in love with yourself as you're doing it. So let's look at that first half, which is to create a graphic or timeline. So you could do that in a linear timeline, or you could do it as a journal entry, or if you rather draw, you can also do it as drawings. So I'll give you an example of how I do this. So we'll talk about setting the space, but I know many of you are familiar with that. But when I first started doing this for myself, I teach timelines traditionally in all my classes. And so I do mine more as journaling. And I went by decade because I'm a little bit older, but I have had younger people, who are like 25, 30 years old when I do this. So I tell them to go about every 5 years, according to, what's your earliest memory. Now, keep in mind, many people have much more of a traumatic memory than I do. Okay, and I'm not asking people to relive this, and it should never take the place of a certified medical professional or mental health counselor. This is something you can do in conjunction with them. But one of the main reasons I developed this is I did start noticing people who just would not talk to anyone else and really needed to, especially our veterans. It's very hard for them, especially because they're asked to relive traumatic events over and over. And this is just a recognition of the event. It is not asking you to go through it. So mine, you see the droplet of blood over there. My earliest sort of traumatic memory was falling. I was walking that little dog, you see, at 3, and she pulled me too hard. And I fell face first on the concrete and I knocked out my front tooth. And I wanted my father, who was an accountant, we only had one car, it was the 70s, to come home and take care of me, because I definitely am very connected to my dad. And my mom was doing everything, and she was not a person who was good with blood. She was trying to hold it up. We didn't have any Google back then. She's going through the yellow pages trying to find a doctor who can see me. And I still, when I looked at this, when I went into meditation and did original wounding, I was still holding on to that sort of a abandonment wound. Why didn't dad show? Now I'm a grown mom of 2 kids, and I look back at it and I asked myself, I felt abandoned, but I literally had a village show up. My mom called my dad. My dad couldn't come, so he sent his secretary, who was childless. I can still see her face when she walked in the room, and she drove this really cool little sports car. And I was just gushing blood everywhere. They got me to the dentist, and the worst thing the dentist told them would happen is that it did take me till I was about 7 years old to get that front tooth in. If the other tooth dropped down before that one. And that kind of left me as a kid who was different. I was already a very light-skinned redhead, much different than the Florida kids. I grew up beachside Florida with the blonde, tan kids. And it drove me a little bit inward. Definitely made me more of an introvert than I would, I think, normally have been. So how do I handle that? When I went in and I did this, the first thing I did was talk to 3-year-old me. And you hold space for whatever age you are, that inner child, and say, you know what? You made it. You're okay. And not demeaning that part of you or that memory of you, no matter what age it is, but you accept yourself. You see yourself at that age. And you say, you know what? We made it. And you're okay. And is there something you'd like to do today? Okay. Because I'm here for you. I'm here for you now. And the idea is, as you move through this, if you are working with another person and you have that energy exchange, and we'll talk a little bit about this, we're just holding space for them. We really don't say anything if we're working with another person unless you note that they are really dropping into the trauma. And then you might be that friend or that loved one who offers them a bit of hope from there. For an example, I worked with a soldier at one point who had gone through PTSD. And when I was doing this and we got to the positive event, it's like, oh, I love to play soldier with my friends. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? You got to work in what you dreamed of being when you were little. Now, it may not have turned out the way you expected it to, but how many people can say that? I told him, still trying to monetize Fairy Witch Ballerina. I'm like, I got the witch part down. The ballerina didn't work out. There were too many injuries. And supposedly we have a touch of the fae about us in the family. But other than that, that, and it was funny because his face lit up and he said, I never thought of it that way. Never thought of that. So when you are working with someone else, if you see something good that you can bring out, otherwise just let them talk, make sure they don't go too far into reliving anything. Okay. And then you counter that. What's that positive event? So ironically, that same dog that pulled me down, my happiest, earliest memory is going to what we called the pound, the animal shelter at that time, and picking out Lucy, who was my companion for 18 years. My parents were very much, I'm sure many of your parents were too. If the dog bites you, they do it for good reason. I mean, the dog never got, the dog had an attitude. She was a terrier mix. And I loved her to death. But it was just like, no, what did you do? Reflect on what you did that may have made the dog bite you. So I started to develop this really deep relationship with animals and nature. And because I look different with that front tooth out and the freckles and the red hair, that was just a thing. I love to go fairy spotting. I love to talk with fairies. They didn't scare me. The ghosts scared me a little bit. The fairies, not too much. I remember sitting for hours to see, will an animal come up to me? Well, I love the roly-polies. Will they play in my hand? Can I return them back? At one point, up and visiting my grandmother in Ohio, I was saving earthworms from drowning. My grandmother had to explain to me they weren't drowning. That's where they lived. So how do I use this now? Now, especially after spending 9 months in shamanic training, having that relationship, as I said, it used to just be the ancestors and the elements that would speak to me. Now, every now and then the tree has a word with me, or an animal has something to say when they come to me. I have found that nature communicates with you a little differently, but it's something that I just love. And it really, when you talked about grounding from that very traumatic early event, which for honestly probably shouldn't have been that traumatic, but was, it led me into this type life, and there were other things too, but these are just things we're hitting on. And then you can go in, and what I recommend people do is you start with your earliest and then you move forward, and you talk to yourself at that age. So, if we looked at ages 11 to 20 and you ask that teenager what they want to go do, make sure it's not a toxic decision because your teenage self often has things that are, legal for you to do now, but probably not too healthy. But that's what we do, is we just go in and say negative, positive, because it's truly so in shamanic practice and even in therapy, what they'll teach you is you're trying to neutralize those ages. My vision of this is almost like the tower, right? We are building from these experiences, and often things that we do go through that are incredibly traumatic, which may turn us inward, make us highly intuitive. My mother grew up in foster care until she was 12 years old. And I'm telling you right now, if the apocalypse was coming, that is the woman I would have had with me, because no one was a better judge of character. And she just had those instincts. She could read a person very quickly. Now, was that a result of being around a lot of bad people? Absolutely. But she also was someone who worked to that strength. She recognized that. So that's how we build. But of course, remember, as we do this and we start to say, okay, we want to heal, some of our foundations may be shaky. You start to raise your vibration, and we're going to talk about that with sacred space. some people may fall off in your life, some family members, some friends. I think I'm talking to an audience who probably already knows this, but when I do go in with people who've never done this before, I do have to warn them of that because they do start to heal, but some will come back to me and say, wow, my life turned upside down and I had to rebuild. And I said, yeah, welcome to shadow work. That's part of it. We can't avoid them. So, we weren't all love, light, and happiness. We got here for a reason. So that's something that I do have to warn a lot of people. So as we're doing this and working through this, if you have not read Warrior Goddess Training, I absolutely love her. She trained with Don Ruiz from the Four Agreements. And she really has the best quote for what does it mean to hold space? It means that we're walking alongside that person in the journey, quite literally holding our own hand or holding their hand. Okay, but we're not judging them. We don't want to make them feel inadequate. You don't want to do that with yourself either. You're not there to fix 3-year-old you. You're there to acknowledge 3-year-old you. Okay. And we realize, those of us that work with energy, that the outcomes can sometimes be a bit unpredictable. Okay. As in the instances with fire. So, but a nice thing about holding space for other people is we learn how to open up that heart chakra and we offer that unconditional support and we let go of that judgment and control. And I think the best thing when you are working, especially with another person, is to have someone sit there and hear you say this, who is not judging you, who is not trying to control the discussion. That's priceless, right? That's priceless. And it's not getting paid by the hour to hear it either. So that's something to think of as well. So creating space. So you already started here. You guys are very familiar. When people are first starting out, I do recommend a white candle for this one, simply because we're bringing in that innocence and that purity. I went in and I researched herbs. So when I first did this, I preferably get herbs from my own garden at home, and I use roses a lot because they are the highest vibration. Rose and lavender have two of the most calming scents as well. So I always keep like a rose spray or an oil in my house if my own roses are currently blooming, or if I don't have any rose petals because I've put them all in my Florida water that day. Okay, the same thing. So we're going to try and engage all the senses, the white candle, the fragrance for the smell, rose quartz or amethyst. I wear those every day for love and protection. I also have the rose quartz on my wand here, so that usually goes with me. Soft music. You don't want it to be over the people talking, okay, but music is a great way to lift the energy in a room. I actually prefer the heart healing chakra music. They have that on YouTube. Another favorite of mine, for some reason, are Gregorian chants. Now, I know they affect the solar plexus, which for me, I correlate that area with happiness. So that might be why I really like the Gregorian chants, but it'll drop it down a little bit for you if you prefer that over the heart healing music is usually flutes and harps and things like that. And then I also welcome in any type of amulet or protective symbol. I always have feathers with me. And, here in Florida, white feathers are, we're not going to tell anyone I picked that up off the ground, but they're readily available. If you are trying to go with someone who needs more focus, then if you have a hawk feather or some type of condor or a grounding feather, those are also great to bring in. Sometimes I have other symbols right now. Not only do I have all my beads on and my emerald, but I wear, so I bring in the ancestors. So I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is an Aurora Borealis stone, and then my grandmother's wedding ring that I keep with me. So any of this can be possible. Like I said, tonight, I don't think you can see it very well because of the lighting, but that's my white rose with lighting in it that I have with me. So setting that space beforehand, once you've already made your timeline, bring it with you. Now, if you're going to do this with another person, when I've practiced this, I connect both hands. I consent, have them consent to share that energy, and we set the timer. We start with the 11 minutes. The first time I did this, I went for an hour and 11 minutes. And the fact that, and I was just sweating profusely. I don't have a huge memory of it because I do also channel when I'm doing this. But the goal is if you make eye contact, you are looking for the light within their eyes. If you start to see the light fade, you've got to pull them back up out of, whatever it is they have sunk down into. Okay, because the trauma can be dangerous, especially if they go too deeply into that. So try to keep it just a naming of it rather than them cycling back into it. Okay, and when you complete a decade, it's very important that you call yourself back to the present, or you both call yourself back. So you state your name, you state what day it is and what age you are. Okay, so each time you move from a decade or a session, you want to call yourself, ground yourself back into this body, because it is easy to get lost in the ethers when you do something like this. Now, if you're choosing a mirror, you still do all these practices, but I have you hold your right hand for release up against the mirror to the higher self. What are we releasing? If you have something you want to call in, left hand. Okay. So this is ideal. If you have a setup somewhere in your home with a mirror facing a mirror, you can see this. But what I loved about this visual was that this is, when I got this download and I performed this for the first time, I realized the purpose of this is for us to fall back in love with ourselves. Okay. And so we need to love ourselves in every stage and accept ourselves in every stage. And that's why I recommend now, ask your inner child. My inner child will always want to go either fairy spotting or feather hunting or looking for shells. I was explorer, and here in Florida, there's always wildflowers or gifts you can find. If you ask my teenage self, it would be go put me in a stack of books, either at Barnes and Noble, preferably the library where I'm going to check it out rather than buy the stack of books. Okay. And if you ask my 20-year-old self, I'm going to go back to that same place or to the ocean, ground in the water, and just let yourself do that. Even though you've called yourself back to the present, reward yourself for going through this. And sometimes we have to go back a couple of times. And that's okay. That's okay. This is a journal that's meant for us to be able to do that. So what are the results I've seen from the people that I've done this with and from what I've heard back from others? The first thing is you have to give yourself, your friend, peer, your loved one grace as you discuss these strengths and weaknesses. Even if it's your best friend, and I did do this with my best friend, and some of our favorite memories are doing some very stupid things together. But we try not to call it a stupid thing when we are talking about it, right? We say, oh, we didn't know any better when we went in and did this. Okay. And another thing, especially with people new to energy work, I'll tell them, remember that practice of loving yourself and that divine creation in others, that's a daily reminder to be balanced. This whole idea is to balance and integrate the shadows, not deny them, not be all the love, light, and happiness people that pretend they didn't have any bad days. No, we need that balance. Without, light, there's no dark. Without dark, there's no light. But we chose to come here. We're imperfect spiritual beings, but we should love ourselves in our entirety. And another reason I started doing this, oh, here we go. And I love this quote. This is actually one of my online friends, The Keys to Heal Within. Being a teacher of 30 years, I can tell you this is the truth. Teaching people how to regulate their emotions becomes crime prevention. It becomes addiction prevention. It's the path to a world where people can disagree and still respect each other. And we are losing that. We are losing that ability. And especially with our social media and the powers that be out there right now. So I think it's really important that we start having these type conversations, with ourselves and with our loved ones too. And if you want to know more, I do sessions via Zoom or in person if you want to travel, not only for myself, but corporations. That would be this site. I also have I write interactive books. So I was an English teacher, so I write in the books. So this one, I don't know if you guys can see that, but I actually just have that tooth that fell out coming back in. The other one's already in. This is a book of poetry, again, all interactive on about my 2 years worth of journals, because this started back in 2023 into this practice. I have a fairy book. And I am diversity, equity, and inclusion certified. So in any of my books, you're going to see people of all abilities and all races and genders included. And the fairy book is for all ages, as long as they can write. And it's designed so you can write your own fairy tale at the end. And then this is if anyone's working through like divine feminine awakening, can be used like an oracle deck as well, but it has, again, just pictures and journal entries to go with it. So that's a little bit about me. I do weekly readings, depending on what the energies are. I may pull angel decks. I may pull nature, shamanic decks. I do have a few witch oracles I bring in, or just tarot. If it's a rough day, we'll just pull tarot. So you can connect with me at either Instagram or TikTok at Spiritual Conversationist. That's what I call myself online. So